Welcome back to the second hour of Bedtime with Bruce. For those of you that have been with us and have been checking us out, you will know that the second hour is dedicated to erotica. So we're going to get a little adult now. So all you children that were watching to learn about the Great Gatsby, you can go now. We're going to read. I got a book called Secret of Black Oaks, and it's written by Ashley Carter, which is a pseudonym actually for a man named something Whittington. I don't remember his name, but it's a man, and he's writing as a woman, I guess. And this is the second book in a series of 4. So I don't know how that's going to be. I didn't realize that when I got this, but I was looking for something vintage, something kind of cool. So we'll try this out, and if we are confused at the end of it, maybe tomorrow I'll start a different book that isn't the second part of a 4-part series. We'll see. It's a learning process. So, I mean, it looks sexy. Let's see. Secret of Black Oaks, a lusty novel of dark passions and erotic adventures. Delicious. It's got a picture of a black dude making out with a white lady. Oh yes. Down with the swirl. Let's jump in, shall we? Part 1. The Wedding. Master. Wake up, Master Styles. It's cock crowing time, Master. You said for sure I was to wake you. You got to see them old cotton wagons first thing this morning. Styles stirred in the down mattress and struggled upward, unwillingly from warm depths of sleep towards chilled wakefulness, with all its renewed apprehensions. He shivered, breaking free of the nightmare that had snared him in its persistent webbing. A dog barked in the slave quarters. Dimly, Styles heard muted clatter of harness and gear, the snuffling of dray animals, and the creaking of iron-rimmed wheels in the pre-dawn stillness. Negroes working down at the barns talked in subdued and cautious tones, careful not to disturb the white folks asleep on the manor house. Across this insistent mingling of sounds rose the controlled violence of Boz Pilser's guttural voice. The fat-bellied Dutch overseer swore in a monotone, but he swore steadily, repeating himself only infrequently. Pilser believed there were 2 ways to keep niggers moving. You cursed them, or you stung them with the whip. Styles writhed deeper into the sensuous warmth of the covers. He couldn't go on lying here, as devoutly as he might wish it. He had to be fully awake and in total command. This huge farm was his responsibility. Boz Pilser's law was the rule of the whip. Yet only he, Styles Kenrick, had the power of life and death over the slaves. He flung his arm over his face. These blacks responded to any orders sluggishly and unwillingly. You stayed on their tails or you went broke. Pilser used the lash and the slaves obeyed for the moment. They moved when the overseer cursed them. They jumped in a way Boz found comical when he touched them up with the lash on their tough black hides, but with every bite of the whip their resentment simmered hotter beneath the sullen surface. Only fear of greater punishment from the plantation master kept them in line. Styles cursed impotently. He had to get down there, and yet he delayed. Please wake up, Master. Moab's hand closed on the bare flesh of Styles' shoulder. The young black shook him timidly, yet insistently. Styles hardly felt the nervous urgency in the boy's hand, but he was acutely sensitive to the heated strength in those fingers. Please, Master Styles, sir. We sure got us a lot to do this morning, Master. Styles winced, now awake and conscious of the confusion and tensions that marked every waking hour. His mouth twisted. He felt overwhelmed by events outside his control. The big house stirred like a broken anthill. The women and the house slaves getting ready for Christmas, and that damned wedding of Miss Claire's big-breasted cousin from Charleston. The thought of young Farrell's impending return from the monastery renewed old rages. On top of this, the new head cook was uncertain and indecisive. The kitchen was chaos. There could not be a worse time for Mr. Cletus Dennison's arrival. The slave breeder had one motive for this visit. He'd renew his offer to buy the two Fulani slaves, Blade and Moab, naming a figure in the thousands that no sane man could refuse. "Please, master, you told me you've got to get up." Stiles nodded. Sleep was out of the question, but for the moment he lay with his eyes closed against a candle, guttering in Moab's fist. Yawning luxuriously, Stiles stretched himself languidly under the covers. His slender 6-foot frame with its golden skin had a feline grace, and the beauty of his chiseled perfection. His wavy black hair, still damp with the night's sweat, toppled over his forehead. His delicately hewn features were enhanced rather than marred by the arrogantly tilted brow and innate haughty petulance flaring from his nostrils. Stiles opened his long-lashed eyes. Their trenchant blue added chill to his remote and unapproachable demeanor. He blinked against the lancing of saffron light and gazed with pleasure at his tawny body slave. "Moab," he whispered. Moab smiled, waiting. Moab was 16 or 17, plantings old. No one knew for sure, but already he was demonstrating the natural cat-like grace of the sinewy, beautiful young man he would become. He was still as naked as he had been when he crept from his master's bed to his own pallet at its foot sometime during the night after Stiles finally slept. This golden-brown youth was a perfect animal, except for a slowly healing wale sliced across his back from shoulder to hip bone. Stiles smiled and drew the tip of his tongue across his lips. He was sensuously stirred by everything he saw in this purebred Fulani boy. The rippling cord-like muscles of his pectorals, the wide supple shoulders, the flat belly, and that proud appendage tumescent at his pillar-like thighs. There was about this slave boy the mien of his regal ancestry. He looked to be a direct descendant of those dark gold conquerors of the 10th century Senegal. Stiles swung one leg from beneath the handcrafted quilts. He moved as if to get out of bed and then stopped. He sank back and lay still. His long-lashed eyes slumberous, he gazed longingly upon Moab's bronzed nakedness. "You're beautiful, truly beautiful, Moab." Moab smiled unself-consciously, pleased at his master's flattery and reassured by it. He had heard those words often in the past few years, in hidden haylofts with pliable black girls, in bed with Boz Pilner's wife. But from the master of Black Oaks these words assumed new and deeper significance. He felt a surge of personal power, a sense of security he knew was denied every other black on this plantation. "Them other planter gentlemen belong soon with they cotton wagons, Master Stiles." Moab's voice carried a dutiful inflection rather than any tone of conviction. He was speaking the words he knew he was expected to say. Yes, I know that." Stiles slid his gaze downward over the boy's muscled chest and flat belly. Then he reached out, trembling slightly, and stroked Moab gently, excited by the response he aroused in his young slave. He wanted to laugh out of his exultance because Moab's enjoyment of his caress matched his own rising excitement and compulsive needs. "Whole place going to be stirring with folks. Mighty soon now, master." Moab's voice was feathered. His breathing labored. He stood perfectly still, enjoying the erotic pleasures his master's caresses aroused within him. And there was, too, the secret sense of power his owner's need bestowed upon him. In his way, he was able to exercise a strong control over his master, and he could strengthen that hold as long as his body pleased the white man. "Yes, I must get up, right away." But Stiles said the words indolently. There were compelling reasons why he should get up at once and take command. That damned Farrell was arriving momentarily. It was vital that Farrell see how totally in charge Stiles Kenrick was. The way to forestall trouble with Farrell was to let the holy bastard see who was boss here. Moab stood erect, pulsating and rigid in Styles' fist. You're a strong and handsome boy, Moab. Styles lay and stared at Moab's gleaming body, his eyes glazing over. Get in, Moab. Styles turned the covers back, quivering with desire. Oh, yes. Moab blew out the candle and slipped into bed. Breathing raggedly, Styles reached out both arms. It can all wait, an hour anyway, Styles whispered. He moved his hands over Moab's heated thighs. You like this, don't you, Moab? You like being my slave? Yes, master. Moab caught Styles' head between his hands, pushing him downward. He heard his master's frantic breathing intensify, and he closed his hands tighter. Oh, yes, master, I likes being your slave. I'm just going to stop for just a second here. I would like to reassure everybody that the homoerotic hour is next. This is not the homoerotic hour. However, we're starting out kind of like that. I'm interested to see where we take this. This is the next section. Hunter Campbell awoke in the dark hour before dawn. He lay in his bed for only a few moments, listening to the slaves readying the cotton wagons down at the barns. Then he swung his legs over the side of the mattress, anxious to be down there. He lit a candle. Through the window, he looked at the barns and the slave quarters on the incline beyond. Pine knot torches and a roaring wood fire illumined the barnyard. Firelight glistened liquidly on sweated black bodies and in ebony eyes. Wearing boots, whipcord trousers, linen shirt opened at the collar, and wool jacket buttoned against the winter chill, Hunt blew out the candle and let himself out of the corridor. Miss Campbell, his Hunter! Hunt paused and gazed around in the gloom of the upper hallway. He saw a shadow slither from the darkness, and a small flower's soft hand grasped his. With surprising strength, the girl drew him toward a barely cracked bedroom door. Hunt braced just outside the door. Jamie Lee, he whispered. Come in, she pleaded, tightening her fingers. Just for a minute. Jamie Lee pulled him through the doorway and closed it stealthily behind them. She slumped against the door, facing, staring up at him, waiting. Her full-lipped mouth parted, her breath rasping across it. Even in the vague and diffused candlelight, Hunt could see how the young girl's swollen breasts struggled against transparent fabric. She was a tiny girl with a supple, slender body from which those breasts jutted startlingly. Her tousled curls toppled around her shoulders. She looked up. She looked as if she'd lain restlessly upon her rumpled bed. Her violet eyes accused him. I waited for you all night. Hunt stared at her helplessly. Why would you do that? Her smile faded. I saw you looking at me last evening. He flushed. You must be quite accustomed to men looking at you. She smiled, glancing down at the high-standing breasts so taut they looked bruised and marbled hard nipples. She was inordinately proud, and justifiably so. But I looked back at you, she said. He felt the girl's hungry eyes go over him, the dark hair rounded forehead and Yankee blue eyes set in a chill-burned face. His nose was straight, sharply chiseled with flared nostrils. Her mouth was tight-lipped. Part of his aloofness, had acted as a challenge to other men more than once. But he saw in Jamie Lee's eyes that she found it exciting. You had to know how I felt, Jamie Lee whispered. You had to know. Sorry, Jamie Lee. I'm just a blue-belly Yankee. I'm not very smart. Don't patronize me. Don't dare patronize me. I could see you looking at me. I knew what you wanted. You knew I wanted it too. He winced. Was his sexual starvation so obvious? It had been a hellish long time since he'd had a woman, black or white. He'd had the slave girl, Safina, thanks to the understanding and kindness of the late Farrell Baynard, Sr. He'd gotten Safina pregnant and caused her to be sold as a female breeding animal to a slave breeder named Dennison. He hadn't wanted another black girl since Safina, and he didn't want this white wench. She had trouble written all over her reckless little body. I was entranced by you, Jamie Lee, but I am also forced to remember you were here to marry Mr. Link Tetherow. Her eyes chilled over. Her cheeks set as hard as a ceramic glaze. Her peach-bloom complexion burned with blood hot under its flawless translucent surface. Forgive me, Jamie Lee, What are you? A Molly like Uncle Styles? He bit back laughter, but no longer attempted to answer her. Miss Clare told me her cousin Jamie Lee Seton was the rose of old Charleston society. Are all the gentle belles as charming, as winsome as you? I'm what I am, Jamie Lee said without apology. I'm a woman. You're 17. A woman. And I thought you were a man. He bowed. All of us make mistakes, Jamie Lee. Her head tilted and her mouth curled in savage disdain. Why don't you get out of here before I scream? He spoke teasingly. Does this mean you don't want me after all? Get out, you grinning bastard, and stop laughing at me. I could never laugh at anyone with tits like yours, my love. I wonder, indeed, if Mr. Link Tetherow has any idea just what he is getting. Get out, her voice rasped. I will scream. He bowed again and let himself stealthily out into the hallway. He heard something smash in Jamie Lee's bedroom, and then it was quiet in there. He exhaled heavily. He'd lost a hell of a roll in that girl's bed, but he had escaped trouble that might have swamped him. He glanced along the corridor toward the closed bedroom, behind which Kathy slept. He hoped to God she was still asleep. He went quietly along the dark upper hallway and down to the narrow rear stairs, lighted with saffron shafts from the busy kitchen below. Okay, it's a little more promising now. Now we've got some man and woman action. Oh, it's getting hot in here. Oh, yes. All right, section 3, chapter 3. The girl's face came in so abruptly and so close to Morgan's that her hot breath seared his cheeks and brought him awake violently. He lay for a moment, trembling helplessly. Before he could cry out, Jamie Lee clamped her hand tautly over his mouth. She dug her fingers into his chubby cheeks. Morgan stared up at her in anguish. The violence in her eyes warned him to remain silent. He fought to break away from her vice-like grasp on her cheeks, but he could not move. He struggled, shaking his head back and forth on his goose-down pillow. The girl remained bent close over him, illumined by only a small candle she must have lighted on his bedside table. Her deep blue eyes glittered wildly in the candlelight. Morgan could see nothing in the darkness beyond the golden hair that framed her face and toppled warmly against him. He wanted desperately to yell for Soapy. Soapy would know what to do. Soapy wasn't afraid of girls. He wanted to call out, but she held him too fiercely. He couldn't cry aloud either, but he could only make strangled sounds deep in his throat. "Where is Soapy?" she whispered, her heated breath fragrant across his face. Morgan shook his head back and forth, unable to answer. He flung out his arm, seeking Soapy in the bed next to him, but he found the sheets chilled and empty. He felt the old momentary dread that always incapacitated him when he couldn't immediately locate his body slave. He shook his head negatively again. Jamie Lee released her grip on him at last. "Why do you want Soapy?" Morgan said. She stared at him, ill-veiling her contempt. Morgan, at 16, was a rugged youth, nearly full-grown physically, even slightly overweight. He weighed 200 pounds at least, with heavy shoulders, keg-like chest, and stocky legs. He would have been an impressive giant of a man except for that indolent fat. His gentle face, made softer with baby fat, was said to be remarkably like his deceased father's. But in his mind, Morgan was childlike, and he would never be any more than that. Everybody in Charleston who knew about Miss Clare's son said it was a shame. Jamie Lee moved her full-grown young breast closer to Morgan's flushed face. Would you like to get me in your bed with you, Morgan? He felt his heart lurch, and his face flamed red to the roots of his thick curly hair. He swallowed with difficulty. But I got no clothes on, Cousin Jamie Lee. How nice, she said. Would you like me to take off my gown? He stared at her, unable to lift his bemused gaze from those breasts so clearly defined beneath the sheer silk fabric. She was going to undress, going to let him look at them, naked? He managed to nod and then said, troubled, Suppose somebody comes in. They won't. But if and they did, they won't, Morgan. I locked the door. He felt that lurching in his heart again. He managed a wan smile, afraid he was going to get sick at his stomach. You are humongous pretty, Jamie Lee. Soapy say he bet there ain't no prettier white girl in this world. Her voice rasped and her violet-hued eyes glittered. You want to talk about that Negra, or do you want me to get in your bed with you so we can have some fun? He nodded, fascinated. You can get in bed with me. I'd like that a heap, Cousin Jamie Lee. She was sliding the soft fabric of her gown upward along her body. Morgan gazed raptly, unable to breathe. He had never encountered flesh that combined the texture, color, and quality of fresh Easter lilies with the dew on them. The roundness of her hips, the splash of faint color in the triangle at her thighs, the soft planes of her belly, were all new and unknown to him. She said, Turn the covers back for me, Morgan. He managed to gasp, protesting, But I'm naked. She stopped again, chilled with frustration. Of course you are, she said. I want to see you naked too, Morgan. Girls like to look at boys. They do? Turn them back, Morgan. Jamie Lee jerked her gown up, pulling her blonde curls high so they plunged back about her pale face and naked shoulders in a golden shower. Morgan stared at her helplessly, barely able to breathe. His chest ached so excruciatingly that he thought he might die, but he was locked, unable to move, unable to pull his stupefied gaze from Jamie Lee's candlelit bosom. Hands trembling, he turned the covers back. Jamie Lee's gaze followed the folding quilts. Her lips parted and her eyes widened in pleasure and surprise when she saw the thick, stocky mass quivering with the pulsing of his blood. She forgot her contempt, her anger, her frustration. She gazed at the size of Morgan's manhood and knew everything was going to be all right. Well, all right. She got quickly into bed beside Morgan. He did not move, but lay rigid in a violent seizure of nervous shaking. What's the matter with you? She demanded. Morgan shook his head, unable to speak. Don't be nervous, she said. She forced herself to speak tenderly to conceal her impatientness. It's nothing to be afraid of. He nodded, forcing an agonized caricature of a smile. She drew her gentle fingers along his chest. She felt his thick muscles quivering in reaction to her touch. Haven't you ever done this before? Soapy sleeps with me sometimes, he gasped. She laughed at him, dummy. Dummy, I don't mean that. I mean like this, with a girl. No, he shook his head. The words struggled up through his throat. He was afraid he was strangling. Her hands caressed him. Haven't you ever wanted to? He nodded. Yes. Oh, yes. She smiled, kissing along his jaw. Well, now you can. Now you can touch me. Go ahead. Any way you like. Any way you like, Morgan. Anything. And I'll touch you like this. She reached down and slid her satiny smooth hand across the rise of his belly and closed her delicate fingers on him. He managed to gasp, Oh God, oh my God. Then he ejaculated. His tool bucking violently in her fist, the hot fluid erupting, gushing, and dribbling stickily down her wrist and arm. Jamie Lee jerked her hand away from him and sat up, staring at him, her face cold. Why in the hell did you do that? She demanded. You touched me, he said. Of course I touched you, you ninny. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to get it all over you. She wiped her arm and hand on the gleaming white percale sheet and shook her head impatiently. It's all right, she laughed in a rueful way. It's not the first time that's happened. What's the matter? Why can't some men wait at all? Morgan stared at her, unable to answer because he wasn't sure what she was talking about. His lip quivered, and he looked saddened. Are you going now? He asked. Jamie Lee laughed at his tone of desolation. You don't want me to go, do you? Oh, no, I want you to stay. She smiled and lay down again with her golden head on the pillow beside his. She whispered, Will you try to do better if I make you hard again? Oh, it'll be hard again in just a few minutes if you stay here naked like this. Well, you hang on this time, you hear, or I won't like you. I'll try. I'll bite my mouth real hard, Jamie Lee. Honest, I'll try. She pulled his trembling hands over her full breast. This is like teaching a baby, she teased, a big 200-pound baby with a monster cannon. He quivered all over. Oh, Jamie Lee, I'm so crazy about you. Now, don't you go saying silly things like that. You know I'm here at Black Oaks to marry Mr. Link Tetherow. You and me, we can have fun like this, Morgan. But not if you go and get serious about an old married lady. Like I'll be soon as Cousin Farrell gets here to perform the ceremony. His voice sank, but he nodded despondent. I'll do whatever you say, Jamie Lee. That's a good fat baby. Take my nipple in your mouth, Morgan. Suck on it hard, real hard. I like that. He hesitated. Will I get milk? She laughed. Why, do you want to? I don't know. I don't think I'd know if I'd like it. She laughed and caught his head in her hands, guiding his fevered face to her rigid nipple. Try it and see. Morgan took her round rose-pink nipple hesitantly between his lips and nuzzled it, nursing. Jamie Lee lay back, sighing extravagantly. It had been a long and hellishly frustrating night, but it was going to be all right. She remained unmoving for a few silent moments, enjoying the excitement and pleasures flaring through her. Then she reached down and closed her fingers on him again. Good Lord, she said, pleased and excited. You're up and hard again? Already? You make me ready. You drive me crazy. Her breath quickened. You can do it now if you want to. He didn't move away from her breast. Do it, she told him. I'm ready. I'm more than ready. I'm burning up down there. He lifted his head. I don't know how, he muttered. I don't know what you want. She exhaled violently in exasperation. Then she pulled him over upon her. I want you on top of me, Morgan, she said, her voice raspy. Now, I want it in me. I want that big thing of yours driven up in me, hard as you can. You hear me? Don't you want to do it? Be careful, he moaned. I might let go again. Damn you. Don't you dare. I'm almost as crazy now. Now, for God's sake, what are you doing? He lay on top of her, resting his weight on his knees. He had taken his engorged rod in his hand and was pressing it furiously and impotently into the dainty mat of pubic hairs at her padded mound. What in the hell are you trying to do, Morgan? I'm trying to put it in you, he gasped. She stared up at him, eyes wide. She gazed, stung with shock, chilled with disbelief, cold with rage. Don't you know anything? I told you, he murmured in abject misery. Oh, damn you. Get off me. Get away from me, you big hulking idiot. You don't even know where it is. You don't even know what to do. Get away. Please, Jamie Lee. She stared at him, her eyes brimmed with furious tears. I knew you were foolish, she raged, but I didn't know you were stupid. Well, that's not sexy. Thought it was going to get sexy. Interested to see where we're going with this. Let's go to next section. Hunt hurried across the busy, crowded kitchen. This gallery was the largest single room in the mansion at Black Oaks. It was the vital heart of the huge farm. But the thought crossed Hunt's mind that there seemed to be more confusion these days in the kitchen and less profusion of luxurious food, daintily prepared, than when this had been the domain of the Eau Rouge, Jeanne d'Arc. I think that's how you pronounce it. Such a vast operation as this satrapy needed the strong dominance of an unyielding mistress. While the elder Baynard lived, the half-negress, half-Indian Jeanne d'Arc had ruled this kitchen as if it were her own suzerainty. Hunt wasn't sure why this intense hatred between Jeanne d'Arc and the new master of Black Oaks existed. Only that the beautiful Musti despised Styles, Kendrick, and one of the first moves Kendrick had made when he took over after Baynard's death was the quick removal of Jeanne d'Arc from the kitchen, from the plantation. It was as if she no longer existed. One asked about her, but only got shrugs, puzzled frowns, or questions in return. All Hunt knew for sure was that Jeanne d'Arc, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that, was gone, and that things were not the same in the kitchen. The place needed her desperately. Kitchens such as this one were almost unknown in the cold area from which Hunt had come. Most New England kitchens he had seen have been set down in the pantry of this one. Most New England kitchens he had seen could have been set down in the pantry of this one. A massive cast-iron wood-burning stove dominated the room, but there were also great built-in brick ovens for baking, heavy spits for roasting and broiling. A thick, unfinished pine table with worn benches along each side could seat 18, and often did, when the kitchen helpers gathered for meals, free periods, or when they and their smaller children huddled in near the fire-bright stove on cold days. The slaves sat along the table, joking and whispering in guarded tones, gossiping and drinking endless cups of chicory coffee with biscuits or buns. There were always crocks of clabber, and the children and the older people ladled out great globs of it to spoon down with corn pone or pancakes. The main kitchen was larger than the formal parlor, in which the Baynards held parties and dances. It boasted a pitcher pump and a porcelain sink that drained directly to the ground beneath the flooring. A short stairway led down to the cooling room, built cavern-like below ground. A walk-in pantry with deep shelving from floor to ceiling was packed with carefully labeled preserved foods, spices, and condiments. Beyond the pantry was a broom and mop closet, almost as large as the smaller bedrooms. Drainboard workspace on each side of the sink was deep, as were the cupboards below it. Stained wood cupboards, ornately carved along the walls, had racks for heavy knives, spoons, ladles, and forks for every use. Aunt Hattie, the slave now in charge of the kitchen and its innumerable workers, had been an assistant to Jeanne d'Arc in the old days, but had never been trusted with much authority. She was an enormous black woman with advanced lordosis. Her buttocks protruded as though she concealed a week's wet wash under her cotton shift. She moved slowly and awkwardly on short legs, bowed by childhood rickets. She's not sexy at all. She spent an inordinate amount of time sprawled spraddle-legged in a butt-sprung wicker chair, gasping for breath and barking out orders. Many of her underlings were afraid to ask her anything because she hid her lack of knowledge under blistering vocal attacks upon the questioner. Hunt sighed. The kitchen was one of the signs of decay about Black Oaks, but it was none of his business. He recognized that his own tenure here was shaky at best. As he crossed the kitchen now, many of the slaves murmured his name, not really looking up at him as he walked through the heated room, redolent with odors of baking, frying, and stewing, and the boiling of chicory coffee. "Morning, Master Hunt," they said. But he had learned the hard way that it was useless and futile and perhaps dangerous for him to attempt to express any friendliness beyond returning their murmured greetings. They were embarrassed and frightened by his attention. He exhaled heavily, feeling that the old sense of guilt and impotence that had haunted him since his arrival here, determined to do whatever he could to better this lot of these sad people. But he had learned to stay away from them. Not because he wanted to. God knew he didn't. He wanted to help them any way he could. But he'd found he'd aided them most by keeping his distance. These slaves had their own world. It didn't seem much of a world to him, a place of misery or denied humanity, but whatever it was, he'd learned one thing for certain. They didn't want him in it. It was still the darkest hour before the first streaking of the false dawn when Hunt reached the barns. Fires, torches, and lanterns illumined the work area in a bright orange brilliance with strange, shapeless shadows hurled against the walls. Dozens of black men sweated under the command of the thickly built Dutch overseer, Boz Pilzer. But Hunt was there for only moments before he recognized that the man responsible for any smoothness and fluidity in the operation was the Fulani Blade. Hunt glanced around looking for Styles Kenrick, but he was not surprised to find that the master of the plantation was not present. Hunt smiled grimly. Old man Baynard must be whirling in his grave at the idea of the master of Black Oaks leaving the direction of the cotton loading to underlings. Rest, old man, Hunter thought, in irony. There would be many changes that would curl your toes since you've been gone. Hunt stood near a high-loaded cotton wagon and watched the operation, the likes of which he had never seen before. The work was hard, the bales were extraordinarily heavy, the dray animals obstinate. He heard the keening murmuring of the slaves as they worked. He could not understand the words. Maybe they were gibberish, a plaintive counterpart to their labors. Or maybe it was remembered sorrow of their ancestors leashed in faraway native villages in the African brush. It was troubling, upsetting, and yet the men worked continually and without pause. The operation seemed to have awakened every black child under the age of 15, and they crowded around, watching, whispering, shoveling, and giggling. Hunt's gaze wandered, but kept returning admiringly to the muscular young Fulani on the gallows-like steps leading up from where the wagons were loaded, one by one, to the platform where the lint was pressed into bales. He supposed Blade was about 20 plantings old, as the age of the slaves was carelessly reckoned. But Blade knew every operation required in loading these wagons. He was on top of everything, keeping it moving and moving smoothly. A bale slipped its coverings. His glistening knife, sharpened beyond the keenness of a razor, appeared and effortlessly slit, chopped, and repaired. Blade moved with the grace and ease of a ballet dancer. He never made two moves when one move would accomplish his task. He sweated as much as the fattest black man among them, but he never appeared to tire. Blade was directing the last of the cotton through the presses to the waiting cotton wagons. In a fenced-in hopper, the loose clouds of cotton lint were raked and prodded into the presses. A 20-foot cylinder turned on graduated gear wheels, powered from below by 8 or 10 blacks plodding in endless circles, pushing a smaller pole, compacted the lint into bales that weighed up to 500 pounds each. These bales fell out to the platform where they were covered separately with cotton bagging and secured with metal ties. Then 2 Negroes on the baling platform tossed each huge bale to the wagon where other black men lashed it to the other high-standing cubes on flatbeds drawn by mules. The Fulani Blade dominated this entire operation. If one of the loaders on the baling platform above him faltered or moved too slowly, he would bound up the steps easily, heft the 500-pound bale, his sweated muscles tightening like twisted cords, and toss it out to the wagon. Hunt watched the young Fulani, fascinated. No matter what difficulty arose, and there were innumerable troubles where sleepy men were overworked, driven, or suddenly cut with the lash of a whip, Blade handled the problems. the lights of fires glittering in his laughing, sweated face, and made it look easy. Hunt knew the young black only vaguely. He was Moab's older brother. He lived alone except for bedwenches who sneaked into his cabin after dark up in the quarters. He was in charge of the plantation commissary. Obviously, he was an intelligent young black, and much of the operation of this farm depended on him. Hunt had seldom seen a man he admired more than he did Blade. He grinned crookedly, wondering what his peers in the Harvard Yard would think of Hunter Campbell's admiration of an illiterate, sweated black man moving cat-like between the press and cotton wagons on a backwaters farm in the remotest God-forgotten redneck region of the enslaved South. Blade was a slave and nothing more, but you wouldn't have believed it looking at him. He held himself with an inborn, splendid, and unconscious pride and self-respect. Head erect, black eyes lustrous, there was undeniable stateliness in his bearing. He was slightly over 6 feet tall, slender, wide in the shoulders, narrow in the hips, and long-legged. There was a clear sheen in the metallic reddish tan of his skin. Sweat streamed down his sinewy body, gave his flesh a coppery gloss. His head was well-shaped, with a high, straight forehead, crisp black hair, slightly indented at the temples, and ears close to the head. There was something of heroic, ancient Grecian sculpture about his features. His delicately hued nose was a classic line from his forehead. His nostrils flared slightly, another touch of that regal arrogance. Bared to the waist as he was in sweaty Ausenberg breeches, he carried himself as though the earth beneath him were his own red carpet of royalty. His lips were full but not thick, his teeth brightly white in the firelight. His lower jaw gave the final touch to this classic beauty of healthy young black. It was finely chiseled, squared, not jutting at all, but in no sense weak. When he braced himself, legs apart on those wide steps, one could visualize a long-departed Moor commander alone on some disputed parapet, savage, barbaric, but unflinching. He's really something, isn't he? At the sound of Kathy's voice, Hunt jerked his head around. What's a pretty lady like you doing awake at this time of day? I've always loved to watch the cotton wagons. The whole place will look like the supply depot of an army encampment when the other growers pull in with their wagons, Kathy said. She smiled. I always loved to watch Blade, too. Daddy was so proud of him. He had such dreams for him. I guess his biggest disappointment was that he could never make his plans for Blade work out. Hunt stood, taut, drawn, looking down at Kathy, entranced. She was incredibly, blondely lovely. Her fresh and fragile beauty. She looked all new and untouched, though she was at least 21 and several years married, was enhanced by the firelight. The strange orange glow of the flames heightened her delicate features and added a liquid luster to her pale blue eyes, a brilliance to her peach-bloom complexion, and glowing tints to the soft ringlets framing her face. Though a kindly or a malicious providence had permitted him to be near her for well over a year, Hunt had never grown accustomed to her Dresden china fragility or the warm naturalness of the smiling that illumined her face. He had never encountered a lovelier girl, not even among those elegant and pampered beauties sought after calculatedly by the wealthiest, most successful of his classmates at Harvard. For Styles Kenrick to have married the loveliest belle in Alabama was for him to have demonstrated his own superiority among his peer landowners. By now, Hunt knew Styles didn't want Kathy as a woman. But, by the same token, Styles wanted her as a startlingly lovely symbol of his primacy. Styles would never let her go. She was one of his most prized possessions. Nothing more, but certainly nothing less. What are you getting at? Kathy smiled up at him, teasingly and yet gently. I never saw you in firelight like this before. It becomes you. Even the shadows of your cheeks or around your hair are lovelier than ordinary shadows. She touched his hand briefly, tautly, pressing it. She laughed. That's why I came down here. Gazed down at her eyes. Hunt gazed down at her, eyes bleak. I love you, he said. Kathy nodded solemnly. I know. He found difficulty in pulling his locked gaze away from this lovely, melancholy little smile. But burning into his consciousness, he felt an almost physical intensity in a gaze fixed on him. He jerked his head up and found Styles Kenrick standing tall and aloofly immobile near the roaring fire, staring at them along his patrician nose, his crystal blue eyes chilled and malevolent. Just looking to see where we're at here. Okay, let's move on. Chapter 5. Ms. Clare paused at the open doorway of Styles' bedroom. For some moments, she did not move, watching the black slave wench Shiva massage ointment into Moab's bare, muscled, and whip-scarred young back. Miss Clare weighed less than 100 pounds, seeming to be slowly evaporating inside herself, no matter how faithfully her body slave old Neva forced huge amounts of healthful foods upon her. Her flesh seemed almost transparent, her small bones looking fragile. She wore floor-length gowns of expensive fabrics designed and sewn especially for her. She favored tiered skirts, ruffles, and flounces. Her complexion enhanced by rouges secretly scrubbed into her cheeks by Neva was unlined. Her pale eyes appeared fixed on some middle distance, invisible to those around her. Feeling Miss Clare's gaze on her, Shiva looked up, flustered, whining her complaint. I left the door open, Miss Clare, so's I wouldn't be alone in no bedroom with no trifling nigger boy. I rubbing his back, 'cause Master Styles, he come and get me and say for me to do this. Miss Clare's head tilted. Hush, girl, do as you're told. We want all the darkies at their best when my husband comes home. Shiva gasped, trembling visibly. As far as Shiva was concerned, the aging woman was haunted, as are all mindless people, mindless and dangerous as witches. Shiva's eyes showed the white rims of terror. She stared at the slender white woman like a wraith in her chiffon dress. Shiva wanted to run from Miss Clare's presence as from any haunted place. She could feel Moab's suppressed giggling through the corded muscles of his wide back. Everybody knew the old master, Miss Clare's husband, was dead and had been dead for months. Miss Clare glimpsed the thin gray wale raised in a jagged stripe from Moab's shoulder down to his hip. She stepped into the room, her eyes stricken. What's that? She said. Is that a whip whale? Yes, ma'am, Miss Clare, ma'am. Moab's tone revealed the self-pity the very mention of this blemish always occasioned in him. Miss Clare's voice sharpened. Who did this terrible thing? Oh, it were done nigh on to 2 years ago, Miss Clare, Shiva said, stroking the ointment into the discolored flesh. Two years? Miss Clare gasped. Does Mr. Baynard know about this terrible thing? What does he say? Oh, old Master Baynard, he was terrible upset when it happened, Moab said with visible pride. And young Master Farrell Jr., too. He was most kind to me. He rode out to the fields where I was just a writhing in agony, Miss Clare, and he picked me up on Master Pilser's own horse and brought me right here to the house. Old Master and young Master. They was most kind. They plumb scared I was ruined for life. I recall they say I a fancy nigger, and that whip scar done ruined me. Of course, Miss Clare said. Of course you are ruined. An expensive animal like you. How often Mr. Baynard said you and your brother Blade were invaluable. You could not be replaced. A full-blooded Fulani. Moab's golden brown face glowed with pride. Yes, ma'am, Miss Clare, ma'am. I'm a real Purintee. I'm sorry. Yes, ma'am, Miss Clare, ma'am. I'm a real Purintee Fulani. Me and Blade. That's a fact. Miss Clare shook her head, deeply troubled. She appeared to be talking more to herself than to either of the slaves. Mr. Baynard must be terrible worried. How many times I've heard him say it. A Fulani must be perfect. How proud he was to own you and Blade. A perfect Fulani. Mr. Baynard always says is worth a king's ransom But once a Fulani animal has been scarred, he might as well be destroyed. Whew. Moab caught his breath, wincing. Oh, I don't reckon I need to be destroyed. No way, Miss Claire. Moab's red-tanned skin showed sweat suddenly. Ain't marred that bad. Ain't no way permanent long as this no-good nigger gal keeps me oiled up good. Doctors say I'm gonna heal up complete. Shiva nodded. We putting medicine on it. We doing all we can, Miss Claire. Miss Claire seemed hardly to hear Shiva. She walked forward and drew her fingers across Moab's wheeled back, as impersonally as if he indeed were an animal. Well, I certainly hope you're doing all you can. I hope it will heal, though I don't have much hope. Mr. Baynard is going to be most deeply upset when he gets home and hears about this. I'm going to be just fine, Miss Claire, just fine, Moab said. The tone in his voice was almost pleading. No one better than he knew that Styles Kenrick was the new master of Black Oaks, but the instilled habit of allegiance and enslavement to the master and Mistress Baynard was too deep in the Black Oaks Negroes to be lightly tossed aside. Why, going to be like new. You're married, Moab, Miss Claire told him in chilled conviction. An expert breeder will certainly find that scar tissue no matter how well it seems to heal, superficially. Oh, I'm going to be like a new nigger boy, Miss Claire. You just wait and see, Moab promised, sweating. Miss Claire's chilled scrutiny told him that she did not share his optimism. No one would buy you, marred as you are. Moab smiled now, slightly more at ease. Ain't gonna sell me, Miss Claire, not me. I'm too valuable. Master Styles done promised me that he'll never sell me. Well, we'll see when Master Baynard gets home. We'll see. Master Styles may not always know what's best for you darkies, or for Black Oaks. Moab's voice shook. Master Styles, he the new master of Black Oaks. Miss Claire seemed not even to hear him. He wanted to cry out, to grab her arms, to force her to listen, but he knew he could never touch her. Master Styles say he got the most Giascudus. He got I don't even know what this word is. Master Styles say he got big plans for me, Master Styles do. Moab spoke rapidly, his panic showing in his black eyes. All his old sense of security suddenly vanished. He had seen the horrible coffle of chained blacks dragging its way past here towards the Louisiana cane fields last year. He still saw it sometimes in his nightmares. The open, bleeding sores, the straggling, hopeless black-eyed blacks. Master Styles got mighty big plans for me. Has he indeed? And what plans has Master Styles for you, with your back scarred like this? Moab looked up, confidently reassured by Master Styles' promises made in the same bed. I gonna stand stud, Miss Claire. What? Miss Claire retreated a step. Don't you talk nasty to that. Don't you talk nasty like that to a quality white lady, Shiva told Moab angrily, unable to look at Miss Claire in the face. No, go on, Miss Claire said. Her translucent cheeks were paler than ever, somewhat like parchment. Is this Master Styles' plan for you? Yes'm, Miss Claire, sure is. Some of Moab's innate self-confidence returned as he contemplated the promises Master Styles had made him in this darkened room. Yes'm, stand stud, I'm going to do that. That's the Master's plan, and for Blade, too. Master Styles said Master Styles say he's going to find us Purity Fulani wenches. We're going to put the seeds in their bellies, Master Styles say. Master Styles say Black Oaks Plantation going to be known far and wide for the finest Fulani fancy niggers in this here country. That's what I going to do. Ain't going to plant no cotton. Ain't going to have to plant no corn. Master Styles say I ain't no field nigger. I a fancy. A Purity Fulani fancy. Black Oak's going to raise fancy Fulani niggers to sell. How many times do I have to say that? Miss Claire's bloodless face paled, starkly white, set. Her eyes glittered. That's what Mr. Styles says, is it? Plans to turn Black Oaks Plantation into a Negro stud farm, does he? Raise Negroes to sell, eh? Well, we'll just wait until Mr. Baynard gets home. We'll just wait. She turned on her heel and walked out the room. Both Moab and Shiva wanted to tell her that Master Baynard was dead and buried up in the cemetery plot on the knoll, but they were afraid to say the words. But they were not afraid once Miss Claire passed through the door into the corridor to giggle about the fey and vaporous woman. They lay giggling on the mattress until they became aware that they were not alone. Shiva looked up first, and she gasped in terror as though she'd been struck across the face. Moab's laughter died, and he lifted his head, staring up at Neva. The fat black woman looked like an avenging angel. Neva had been Miss Claire's body slave since the two of them had been young girls together. They had come here to Black Oaks together almost a quarter of a century ago. Neva stood between her child and all the hurts of the outside world. Now she glared in rage at the two blacks on Master Styles Kenrick's bed. "What you two trashy niggers laughing about?" Neva said. "Nothing," Shiva said. She cringed as far as she could across the bed from the stout, cottony-haired negress. "We ain't laughing about nothing." "That's right. That's the way with empty heads. They rattle at nothing. They can laugh at things they can't understand." "We weren't laughing, Neva," Shiva said. Moab said tenderly, "She thinks Master Baynard's coming home, Neva." "No matter what that po child say or think, you trashy niggers don't laugh at her to her face or ahind her back. No, ma'am. I warned you. You trashy niggers best mind your manners. You think they've been two changes around here? You do just about what you want. Some things ain't changed. I ain't changed. I hear. Long as I hear, you niggers gonna do like you told." "Yes'm, Ms. Neva." "I'm gonna end now." That's a good stopping point. Whew. It was pretty hot and erotic for a while. I was a little worried at the beginning. It got pretty steamy. I can't wait to see what's going to happen next. We will pick up tomorrow. I'm sorry, we'll pick up whenever the next show is. Come back and see us again, please. We will be doing the erotica, and we're going to pick up where we left off. This has been great. I've enjoyed our time together. Thanks very much. Come back and see us again. Hope to see you soon. All right.